The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied a thin layer of concealer under her eyes, trying to hide the sleepless nights that had plagued her for weeks. The reflection staring back at her seemed like a stranger, pale, tired, but determined to maintain the composure expected of someone in her position. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He watched his wife for a moment, noting the way her shoulders held tension she rarely showed in public. Their children's laughter echoed from somewhere in the palace, a sound that usually brought joy to both their faces, but today seemed to highlight the weight of what lay ahead. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, William said softly, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. Catherine nodded without turning around, her fingers working methodically to fasten a simple pearl necklace, the same one she had worn on their wedding day. A small comfort in the midst of uncertainty. The palace staff moved with practiced efficiency around them, but there was something different in the air today. Conversations were quieter, movements more careful, as if everyone understood the gravity of the moment without needing to be told. Even the usually bustling kitchen had fallen into an unusual silence, broken only by the gentle clinking of china as tea was prepared for what might be the last normal morning routine for quite some time. Catherine finally turned to face her husband, and for the first time in years William saw vulnerability in her eyes that she had never shown publicly. They had weathered storms together before, criticism from the press, family tensions, the constant pressure of royal duty. But this felt different. This was personal in a way that cut deeper than any headline or protocol could touch. The children burst into the room, their energy a stark contrast to their parents' subdued mood. Prince George, now tall for his age, seemed to sense that something was different, while Princess Charlotte chattered excitedly about her plans for the day, oblivious to the undercurrent of emotion filling the room. Little Prince Louis clung to his mother's dress, his innocent eyes wide with the kind of intuition children often possess. William knelt down to their level, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Remember what we talked about yesterday? About being brave and taking care of each other?" The children nodded solemnly, though Charlotte's bottom lip trembled slightly. Catherine joined them, wrapping her arms around all three, breathing in their familiar scent of soap and childhood innocence. The knock on the door came too soon. It was time to leave. Time to face what awaited them beyond the protective walls of their home. As they gathered their things, Catherine caught sight of a framed photograph on the dresser, taken during happier times, showing their family laughing together during a summer holiday. She picked it up, holding it close for just a moment before carefully placing it in her handbag. The walk down the palace corridors felt longer than usual. Each step echoed with finality, past paintings of ancestors who had faced their own moments of trial, past rooms filled with memories of celebrations and quiet family moments. The staff they passed offered gentle smiles and barely perceptible nods of support, their loyalty evident in every gesture. Outside, the morning had grown cloudy, as if nature itself reflected the somber mood. The official car waited, its engine running quietly, ready to carry them toward a destination that would change everything. William helped Catherine into the vehicle, his hand lingering on hers just a moment longer than necessary, drawing strength from her touch. As they settled into the leather seats, Catherine looked back at the palace one more time. The windows reflected the cloudy sky, making it impossible to see inside. But she knew their children were watching from somewhere, probably pressed against the glass with their faces full of questions they were too young to understand. The car began to move, carrying them away from the safety of home and toward whatever waited ahead. Neither William nor Catherine spoke during those first few minutes, both lost in their own thoughts, both knowing that when they returned, if they returned, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The journey through London streets revealed a city holding its breath. News had leaked despite the palace's best efforts to maintain privacy, and small crowds had begun gathering along the route. People held phones in the air, trying to capture a glimpse of the royal couple during what many sensed was a significant moment in British history. Catherine watched the familiar landmarks pass by. Buckingham Palace, where she had attended countless state functions, Westminster Bridge, where they had walked hand in hand during happier times. Each site carried memories that now felt precious and fragile, like delicate glass ornaments packed away for safekeeping. William's phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members, government officials, and close friends who had learned of their departure. He glanced at each notification but couldn't bring himself to read them fully. His brother Harry had called 3 times from California, and his father had sent a message that simply read, "We are with you in spirit." The weight of royal responsibility had never felt heavier than it did in the back of that car. The driver, a longtime palace employee named James, occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror with concerned eyes. He had driven the couple to their wedding, to the hospital when each of their children was born, and to countless official engagements. But today felt different. There was a finality to this journey that made his hands grip the steering wheel a little tighter. As they approached their destination, Catherine's breathing became more shallow. She had practiced this moment in her mind dozens of times, rehearsing what she might say, how she might hold herself, but now that it was actually happening, all her preparation felt inadequate. She pressed her hand against the window, feeling the cool glass against her palm, grounding herself in the physical sensation. "Do you remember?" William said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "The first time we drove this route together?" Catherine turned to look at him, seeing past the formal mask he usually wore in public to the young man she had fallen in love with at university. "You were so nervous about meeting grandmother," he continued. "You barely said a word the entire journey." A small smile touched Catherine's lips despite everything. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I kept thinking about all the ways I might embarrass myself or say the wrong thing." They both remembered that day, how young and uncertain she had been, how different their lives were then. The memory felt like it belonged to different people entirely. The car slowed as they entered the more restricted area near their destination. Security became more visible, officers in uniform, barriers that had been erected overnight. Official vehicles positioned strategically around the perimeter. The atmosphere shifted from the casual interest of London pedestrians to the tense professionalism of a major security operation. Catherine could see the building ahead now, its imposing facade both familiar and suddenly intimidating. She had been here many times before, but never under circumstances like these. The flags flying at half-mast told their own story, visible evidence of the gravity that had brought them here today. "The children will be fine," William said, reading her thoughts as he often could after so many years together. "They're stronger than we give them credit for." Catherine nodded, though her heart ached thinking of them back at the palace, probably asking their nannies questions that couldn't be fully answered. Photographers had already taken position despite the early hour. Their long lenses created a barrier of attention that the couple would have to navigate carefully. Catherine had learned over the years to smile through almost anything, but today she wasn't sure her composure would hold. The thought of breaking down publicly, of showing weakness when the nation needed strength, terrified her more than anything else. The car came to a complete stop. Through the windows, they could see officials waiting to escort them inside. Faces they recognized, people who had become part of their extended professional family over the years. Each face carried the same expression of solemn support, understanding the difficulty of what lay ahead. James turned off the engine, and in the sudden quiet, they could hear the distant sounds of the city continuing its daily rhythm. Traffic, construction, the normal sounds of life going on despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them here. It was oddly comforting to know that somewhere people were still going about their ordinary business. William reached for the door handle, then paused. "Whatever happens in there," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "we face it together, just like we always have." Catherine placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth and strength that had sustained her through every challenge their unusual life had presented. The door opened, and the outside world rushed in, camera clicks, distant voices, the crisp morning air carrying the weight of expectation and uncertainty. They stepped out together, William's hand steady on Catherine's elbow, both of them drawing on reserves of strength they had built over years of public service and private partnership. Inside the building, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken emotion. The normally bustling corridors had been cleared of all but essential personnel, creating an eerie quiet that amplified every footstep and whispered conversation. Catherine noticed how the staff members they passed kept their eyes respectfully lowered, understanding instinctively that this was not a time for the usual pleasantries and small talk that typically accompanied royal visits. The familiar scent of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air, but today even these comforting smells seemed different, tinged with the weight of ceremony and farewell. William walked slightly ahead, his military training evident in his posture despite the emotional toll visible in the tension of his shoulders. Catherine followed, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor, each step bringing them closer to what they both knew would be one of the most difficult moments of their lives. They passed portraits of previous generations, faces that had witnessed wars, celebrations, triumphs, and tragedies. Catherine found herself wondering what advice these long-departed figures might have offered, what wisdom they might have shared about facing impossible choices with dignity and grace. The weight of history pressed down around them, reminding them that they were part of something much larger than themselves. An equerry approached them with quiet efficiency, briefing them on the final arrangements that had been made overnight. The words washed over Catherine without fully registering. Protocols, timing, security measures. Her mind was focused on something deeper, more personal than the mechanics of official procedure. She was thinking about what this moment meant not just for them as public figures, but for them as a family, as individuals who had chosen to dedicate their lives to service. William paused at a particular doorway, his hand resting on the ornate handle for just a moment longer than necessary. Behind this door waited people who had become like family over the years. Advisors, friends, colleagues who had shared in both the triumphs and challenges of royal life. The thought of leaving them, even temporarily, felt like tearing away part of himself. The room they entered was smaller than Catherine had expected, filled with warm afternoon light despite the cloudy day outside. Family members had gathered, their faces reflecting a mixture of pride, concern, and barely contained emotion. William's father stood near the window, his characteristic composure intact but his eyes revealing the depth of his feelings. Other relatives occupied chairs around the room, creating an intimate circle of support. Catherine felt the familiar flutter of nerves she always experienced in these family gatherings, but today it was different. Today there was no pretense, no need to maintain the careful balance between personal feelings and public expectations. Today, for perhaps the first time in years, they could simply be themselves, a son and daughter-in-law facing an incredibly difficult decision with the love and support of their family. The conversation that followed was conducted in the low, careful tones reserved for the most serious family discussions. Plans were reviewed, concerns were voiced, and reassurances were offered. But beneath the practical considerations lay the emotional reality that everyone in the room understood, but nobody wanted to articulate directly. This goodbye carried the possibility of permanence that no one was fully prepared to face. William's grandmother's absence was felt acutely in the room. Her empty chair served as a silent reminder of all the changes the family had weathered in recent years, and how this latest challenge would have to be faced without her steady guidance and unconditional support. Catherine found herself thinking about conversations she had shared with the Queen, advice that had been offered with characteristic directness and warmth. The younger members of the extended family struggled most visibly with the emotional weight of the gathering. Cousins who had grown up alongside William, who had shared childhood memories and adult milestones, found it difficult to maintain their composure. The reality of what was happening seemed to hit them in waves, each new realization bringing fresh tears and tighter embraces. Catherine noticed how William seemed to draw strength from being needed by others in the room. When his younger relatives became emotional, he moved naturally into his role as the older brother and cousin, offering comfort and stability, even while facing his own uncertainty. It was a quality she had always admired in him, his ability to put others' needs before his own, especially during difficult times. As the formal farewells began, the room took on an almost sacred quality. These were not just words being exchanged, but pieces of history being created. Each embrace, each whispered reassurance, each promise to stay in touch carried weight that everyone present understood. The cameras waiting outside could never capture the true significance of these private moments. The time came to move to the next phase of their departure. Catherine straightened her shoulders, drawing on every lesson she had learned about public service, about representing something larger than herself. She looked around the room one final time, memorizing faces, storing up the warmth and love she felt from these people who had welcomed her into their extraordinary family. William took her hand as they prepared to leave the intimate gathering and face the more public aspects of their farewell. His grip was steady and sure, a promise that whatever lay ahead, they would face it with the same partnership that had carried them through every other challenge their unique life had presented. The transition from private family gathering to public ceremony felt jarring, like stepping from a warm home into bitter winter air. The corridor leading to the main reception area buzzed with controlled activity, staff members making final preparations, security personnel conducting last-minute checks, and media representatives positioning themselves according to carefully negotiated protocols. Catherine could hear the murmur of voices from the larger gathering ahead, a sound that represented hundreds of people who had played roles in their public life over the years. Charity representatives, military officials, government ministers, and community leaders had all come to participate in what was being carefully described as a transitional ceremony, though everyone present understood the deeper significance of the moment. The transformation in William's demeanor was subtle but noticeable as they approached the public portion of their farewell. His shoulders straightened further, his pace became more measured, and his expression settled into the composed mask that years of royal training had perfected. Catherine felt her own public persona sliding into place, a protective layer that allowed her to function even when her personal emotions threatened to overwhelm her composure. They paused briefly outside the main reception area, listening to the organized bustle within. Catherine could distinguish familiar voices among the crowd, people she had worked with on charitable initiatives, military personnel who had accompanied them on overseas tours, staff members who had become friends over years of shared experiences. The thought of saying goodbye to each of them individually felt almost impossible. The doors opened and they stepped into a room filled with expectant faces. The conversation didn't stop abruptly, but it noticeably quieted as people became aware of their presence. Catherine was struck by the diversity of the gathering, young and old, military and civilian, British and international representatives, all united by their connection to the work she and William had undertaken together. Making their way through the crowd required every social skill they had developed over years of public engagements. Each conversation was brief but meaningful. Each handshake carried emotional weight, and each smile had to be genuine despite the circumstances. Catherine found herself particularly moved by encounters with people who had been touched directly by their charitable work. Parents of children they had visited in hospitals, veterans they had honored at commemorative events, young people who had participated in their youth programs. One conversation that particularly affected Catherine was with an elderly woman named Margaret, who had coordinated community events in a small town they had visited multiple times over the years. Margaret's weathered hands shook slightly as she pressed a small wrapped gift into Catherine's palm, whispering, "For when you need reminding of how much good you've done." The simple gesture and heartfelt words nearly broke Catherine's carefully maintained composure. William was deep in conversation with military colleagues, men and women who had served alongside him during his time in active duty. Their faces reflected the particular bond shared by people who have faced danger together, and Catherine could see how difficult it was for William to step away from these relationships that meant so much to him personally, beyond their official significance. The formal ceremony began with speeches that attempted to capture the significance of the moment without becoming overly emotional. Government officials spoke about duty and service, family members offered words of support and love, and close friends shared memories that highlighted the personal qualities that had made William and Catherine effective in their public roles. Catherine listened to each speaker while scanning the faces in the audience, trying to memorize the scene and the people who had gathered to mark this transition. She noticed tears in eyes throughout the crowd, though most people were working hard to maintain the same composed dignity that she and William were struggling to uphold. When it came time for William to speak, the room fell into complete silence. His words were carefully chosen, balancing gratitude for the opportunities they had been given with acknowledgement of the difficulty of the moment. He spoke about service being a privilege rather than a burden, about the honor of representing the British people, and about the deep personal connections that had sustained them throughout their public life. Catherine's own remarks focused on the people they had met, the causes they had supported, and the profound impact that public service had had on their own understanding of their responsibilities as citizens and as parents. Her voice remained steady throughout, though those who knew her best could detect the emotion she was working to control. The final formal element of the ceremony involved the presentation of gifts and mementos, items that represented different aspects of their work, symbols of appreciation from organizations they had supported, and personal tokens from individuals whose lives they had touched. Each presentation required acknowledgement and gratitude, extending the emotional intensity of the afternoon. As the formal ceremony concluded, the atmosphere became more relaxed, though no less emotionally charged. People began moving around the room more freely, initiating personal conversations and sharing private words of support and encouragement. Catherine found herself surrounded by women she had worked with on various initiatives, their solidarity providing comfort during a moment when she felt particularly isolated by the uniqueness of her situation. The gradual departure of guests created a natural conclusion to the public portion of their farewell. As the room slowly emptied, Catherine and William were left with their closest advisors and family members, the people who would remain connected to them regardless of what changes lay ahead. The contrast between the public ceremony and this intimate conclusion highlighted the dual nature of their lives, always balancing personal relationships with public responsibilities, private emotions with official duties. The final hours before their departure took on a dreamlike quality, with time seeming to move both too quickly and impossibly slowly. Catherine found herself noticing details she had previously taken for granted. The way afternoon light fell across the antique furniture, the particular sound of footsteps on different types of flooring, the subtle sense that made each room distinctive and familiar. They returned to their private apartments for a brief respite before the actual departure. The space felt different now, already touched by the awareness that this might be their last evening here for some time. Personal belongings had been carefully packed earlier in the week, leaving rooms that looked oddly impersonal, despite containing furniture and artwork that held years of memories. The children were brought to spend these final private hours with their parents. Prince George had clearly been briefed by staff about maintaining composure, but his young face couldn't hide his confusion and concern about why his parents were leaving without the family. Princess Charlotte alternated between chattering normally and falling into unusual quiet moments, her intuitive nature picking up on undercurrents she couldn't fully understand. Little Prince Louis clung to Catherine with the fierce attachment that only small children can manage, as if his physical presence could prevent whatever change he sensed was coming. Catherine held him close, breathing in his familiar scent and feeling the solid warmth of his small body against hers. These tactile memories, she knew, would sustain her through whatever separation lay ahead. William spent considerable time with each child individually, having conversations that were clearly planned to provide reassurance and guidance. Catherine watched him navigate the impossible balance of honesty and protection that parenting required, especially when the circumstances were too complex for young minds to fully grasp. His natural ability with children, evident throughout their public engagements, was never more important than in these private moments with their own family. The evening meal was served in their private dining room, a space that had hosted countless family celebrations and quiet dinners over the years. The conversation was deliberately light, focusing on the children's activities and plans rather than dwelling on the impending separation. Yet the awareness of change colored every interaction, making ordinary moments feel precious and significant. As bedtime approached, the children's anxiety became more apparent. Charlotte asked directly when her parents would return, a question that William answered with careful honesty about uncertainty, while emphasizing the certainty of their love and eventual reunion. George, mature beyond his years, seemed to understand that his parents were facing something important that required courage, and he offered his own brave face as support. The bedtime routine that had remained consistent throughout their public life took on special significance. Stories were read with extra attention, songs were sung with particular tenderness, and prayers included special requests for protection and guidance. Catherine found herself memorizing each child's sleepy voice, the weight of their heads against her shoulder, the trust in their eyes as they settled into sleep. After the children were asleep, Catherine and William spent time with their personal staff, people who had become far more than employees over the years. These relationships, built on mutual respect and shared experiences, represented some of the most genuine connections in their lives. The conversations were filled with practical details about ongoing responsibilities, but also with personal expressions of loyalty and support. Their private secretary, who had managed the complex logistics of their public life for several years, presented them with a leather-bound folder containing letters from people who had learned of their departure. Messages from world leaders, charitable organizations, and private citizens created a tangible record of the impact their work had had on others. Reading through these letters provided both comfort and a renewed sense of the significance of what they were leaving behind. The packing of final personal items required careful thought about what to take and what to leave. Photographs, jewelry with sentimental value, books that had provided comfort during previous difficult times, and small mementos from meaningful engagements all had to be considered. Each choice represented a decision about what aspects of their life they wanted to carry with them into uncertainty. Catherine selected a few items that represented different phases of their relationship and family life, a program from their wedding, drawings made by their children, a small notebook where she had recorded thoughts during particularly meaningful charitable visits. These physical objects would serve as anchors to their identity and purpose regardless of what changes lay ahead. As the evening progressed, they received final communications from family members and close friends. Text messages, phone calls, and personal visits from those who couldn't attend the formal ceremony earlier created a continuous stream of emotional support. Each contact reinforced the network of relationships that would continue regardless of physical separation. The last official briefing covered practical matters, communication protocols, security arrangements, and administrative details that would govern their immediate future. But even these prosaic conversations carried emotional weight, as they represented the final formal connections to the life and responsibilities they had known for so many years. As midnight approached, Catherine and William found themselves alone together for the first time all day. The quiet of their private sitting room, filled with furniture and artwork that had witnessed so many significant moments in their life together, provided space for the private conversation they had been unable to have amid the day's public and family obligations. Tomorrow would bring the final departure, but tonight belonged to them as individuals facing an uncertain future, with only their partnership as certainty. Dawn broke gray and misty over London, as if the weather itself reflected the solemn mood that had settled over the city. News of the royal departure had spread throughout the night, and by early morning, crowds had begun gathering along the expected route despite the hour and the drizzle that seemed determined to mark the day with its own form of tears. Catherine woke before her alarm, having slept fitfully despite her exhaustion. The palace around her was unusually quiet. Even the normal sounds of staff beginning their daily routines seemed muted and respectful. She lay still for a few minutes, listening to William's steady breathing beside her, storing up this moment of peace before the day's demands took over. Their morning routine proceeded with unusual care and attention to detail. Each familiar action, brushing teeth, selecting clothes, applying makeup, felt significant because it might be the last time these activities would take place in this particular setting. Catherine chose her outfit with special consideration, selecting pieces that were both appropriate for the formal occasion and personally meaningful to her. The breakfast tray that arrived contained their usual selections, prepared by kitchen staff who had learned their preferences over years of service. But today even the familiar ritual of morning tea carried emotional weight. The delicate china, the precise timing, the unspoken communication between longtime colleagues, all of it felt precious and fragile. A final check on the children revealed them sleeping peacefully, their faces relaxed and innocent of the adult concerns that had dominated the previous day. Catherine spent a few extra minutes in each of their rooms, adjusting blankets unnecessarily, memorizing the sight of them safe and comfortable in their familiar beds. The nannies who would be responsible for their care during the separation waited quietly in the hallway, their professional competence mixed with genuine affection for the family they served. The last official briefing covered final security protocols and communication procedures. Staff members who would remain behind to maintain palace operations spoke in hushed, respectful tones about their ongoing responsibilities. The efficient machinery of royal administration would continue functioning, but everyone understood that something fundamental was changing. Personal farewells with household staff took place in private, away from any media attention. These relationships, built over years of shared daily life, represented some of the most genuine connections William and Catherine had formed within the formal structure of royal life. Housekeepers who had quietly ensured their comfort, security personnel who had protected their privacy, and administrative staff who had managed countless details of their public engagements all received personal thanks and private expressions of appreciation. The final preparation involved a brief private service in the palace chapel, a spiritual moment that provided grounding and perspective amid the emotional turbulence of departure. The familiar prayers and readings offered comfort and reminded them of values and commitments that transcended immediate circumstances. The chaplain's blessing seemed to wrap around them like protective armor for the challenges ahead. As departure time approached, the last family gathering took place in the same sitting room where they had spent their final private evening. Extended family members who had arrived early in the morning joined them for a brief informal farewell that balanced emotional support with respect for the dignity of the moment. Conversations were quiet and personal, focused on love and continuity rather than the uncertainty that everyone felt, but no one wanted to emphasize. The children, awakened and dressed by their nannies, joined the gathering for final hugs and kisses. Their sleepy confusion about the early hour mixed with the previous day's explanations created a poignant scene of childhood trust meeting adult responsibility. Catherine held each of them longer than usual, whispering private words of love and reassurance that only they would remember. The walk to the waiting car took them through corridors, now lined with staff members who had gathered spontaneously to mark their departure. No formal ceremony had been planned, but the quiet presence of these people who had shared their daily life created an unofficial honor guard of respect and affection. Nods, gentle smiles, and a few barely contained tears marked their passage through the familiar halls. Outside, the morning mist had lifted slightly, revealing crowds that had gathered despite the early hour and uncertain weather. The sight of ordinary citizens who had come to witness their departure provided a powerful reminder of the public dimension of their private decision. These people, many of whom had never met them personally, had still felt moved to mark this moment of transition. The car waited with its engine running, official and impersonal compared to the intimate farewells that had preceded this moment. As they settled into the back seat, Catherine caught sight of faces pressed against palace windows, staff members and family members watching from inside, maintaining their own vigil of support and concern. The vehicle began to move, carrying them away from the life they had known toward a future that remained largely undefined. As the palace receded behind them, Catherine reached for William's hand, finding in his firm grip the only certainty available to them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as they had faced every other challenge, together, with dignity and with the knowledge that some choices, however difficult, were necessary for reasons larger than personal comfort. The crowds lining the streets seemed to understand the significance of what they were witnessing. Instead of the usual enthusiasm that marked royal appearances, a respectful quiet prevailed, broken only by scattered calls of support and encouragement. Britain was saying goodbye to two people who had become symbols of service and dedication, and the nation seemed to sense that this farewell marked the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another.